You know, uh, you know that exact scenario, right? It's like 2:00 a.m. You are lying in bed, just staring up at the ceiling, and you feel that really heavy ache in your bones kind of physical exhaustion.
Oh, absolutely. Where your body is practically begging for rest.
Right. But your brain just stubbornly refuses to shut down. I mean, it feels like a profound biological betrayal, honestly. You're just lying there, totally captive to this high-speed train of thoughts, wondering why on earth human evolution wired us to experience like peak mental overdrive at the exact moment we're supposed to be vulnerable and asleep.
It is a universally frustrating and, quite frankly, an incredibly isolating experience. Because, in the quiet of the night, when all those normal daytime distractions are stripped away, the mind doesn't just wander, it sprints.
Yeah, it sprints, and usually straight toward the worst case scenarios.
Exactly. And the worst part is really that internal monologue that comes with it. You lie there in the dark, watching the clock tick from 2:00, 3:00 a.m., and you start agonizing over the anxiety itself.
Oh, the guessing game. Like, is this normal? Am I just stressed from work? Or is this feeling of anxiety actually a bigger problem?
Right. You start wondering, is something fundamentally broken in how my brain works?
Hmm.
And that's secondary anxiety. The anxiety about the anxiety is what often locks the whole cycle into place.
Because you're stressing about the fact that you aren't sleeping.
Yes. Which triggers an adrenaline response, and then, of course, that pushes sleep even further away. So to break that cycle, we really have to start by demystifying what the brain is actually doing in those wee hours of the morning.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because today, our mission for this deep dive is to figure out the exact mechanisms behind this nighttime anxiety. We're drawing on a really insightful clinical guide and practice overview provided by Coping and Healing Counseling, or CHC.
Right, they're a great resource.
Yeah, they're a telehealth therapy group based out of Georgia. And they put together this incredibly validating look at, well, exactly why our thoughts race, how to gently power the brain down, and crucially, what the clinical path forward looks like when these sleepless nights become the rule rather than the exception.
It's a very practical framework.
So, starting with the anatomy of this anxiety, I mean, I've always just assumed my 2:00 a.m. brain is purely chaotic, random stress, like a jumble of everything I just didn't have time to process during the day.
Well, it definitely feels chaotic, but there's actually a very predictable structure to it. The clinical overview from CHC identifies three specific patterns of nighttime anxiety. The first one is the rumination loop.
The rumination loop.
Yeah. This is when you find yourself replaying past events over and over again.
Yeah.
So maybe it's an awkward conversation from 3 days ago or a mistake you made at work last month.
Oh man, I know that one all too well. It's that classic, oh, I should have said this instead moment, right in the shower or bed. But,
Uh,
but why do we do that? The event is literally over.
Because the human brain fundamentally despises unresolved loops. I mean, from an evolutionary standpoint, your brain views social missteps or past errors as potential threats to your standing in the pack.
Wait, like a literal wolf pack?
Basically, yeah. Because we evolved as deeply social creatures, being cast out of the group used to mean literal death. So your brain pulls up that awkward meeting at 2 a.m. and tries to retroactively solve it. It's treating a minor social faux pas like a highly active survival threat.
Wow. That makes an uncomfortable amount of sense, actually. So what's the second pattern then?
The second pattern involves checking behaviors. So this is that sudden, really obsessive urge to confirm physical safety or logistical details. You're lying there, almost asleep, and suddenly you think, wait, did I definitely set my alarm?
Did I lock the front door? Is the stove off?
Exactly. And the urge to check is almost physical. Even if you vividly remember turning the deadbolt, the doubt just eats at you until you literally have to throw off the covers and go look.
I do that with my phone alarm constantly. I'll check it 3 times. Why does our brain demand that?
It's because the risk assessment center of your brain, the amygdala, is misfiring. It is demanding absolute 100% certainty in a world where that just doesn't exist. The anxiety won't let you rest until you provide visual proof of safety.
Okay, so that's the second one. What's the third?
The third pattern is the what-if spiral.
Hmm.
This is projecting your anxieties onto tomorrow or next week or even 5 years from now. What if I fail that presentation? Or what if my car breaks down?
Right. What if I get sick and can't work? So instead of retroactively solving the past, we're trying to preemptively survive the future.
You nailed it. That's exactly what it is.
But, the question remains, why at night? Like, why does my brain serve up this exact platter of rumination, checking, and future casting at 2 a.m. instead of, say, 2:00 p.m.
The biological mechanism here is actually fascinating. See, throughout the day, you're moving, working, and processes a massive amount of sensory input. If you're stressed, your nervous system elevates into a state of heightened vigilance.
But we just don't notice it because we're busy.
Precisely. The daytime distractions mask it. But when you finally turn off the lights, that external input drops to zero. And the thing is, your nervous system doesn't just automatically power down just because you close your eyes.
Right, it doesn't have a simple on-off switch.
Exactly. If it's still flooded with daytime stress hormones, it stays on high alert, sort of scanning the quiet darkness for the threats it assumes just must be out there.
You know, it's almost like your nervous system is a dedicated night watchman patrolling an empty office building.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Think about it. Like the workday is over, the building is totally empty, but this night watchman is still walking the halls with his flashlight, checking all the empty cubicles, jiggling the doorknobs to make sure they're locked. He's taking his job very seriously, working incredibly hard to protect you. He just has absolutely no idea that the threat has already passed.
That's a perfect analogy. The night watchman is your survival mechanism, doing exactly what he evolved to do. The evolutionary flaw, though, is that the night watchman cannot tell the difference between a literal predator wrestling the bushes outside your cave and the theoretical threat of an email you need to send to your boss tomorrow.
Because to the nervous system, a threat is a threat.
Right. It responds with the exact same cocktail of adrenaline and cortisol, regardless of the source.
So, if the core issue is an overvigilant nervous system, this incredibly stressed out night watchman who just refuses to clock out, how do we signal to him that it is safe to stand down? Because, I mean, logic clearly doesn't work. I can't just tell myself to stop thinking.
No, you really can't logic your way out of a physiological response. Which brings us to the practical, evidence-based coping techniques outlined by CHC. They detail 5 gentle strategies designed to basically bypass logic entirely and directly signal safety to the body.
I really appreciate the word gentle there. It implies we aren't supposed to, go to war with our own brains.
That is the whole philosophy here. The first strategy is actually the cornerstone of that gentle approach. Note the thought, don't argue with it.
See, my immediate instinct is to argue. If my brain says, hey, you're going to fail tomorrow, I want to argue back. No, I'm not. I prepared for this. I have my notes ready. Why is arguing a bad idea?
Because engaging in the argument validates the thought as a legitimate threat. When you argue back, you are telling your nervous system, yes, this is an active emergency that requires my full cognitive engagement.
Oh, so it keeps the night watchman on high alert.
Exactly. By simply noting the thought, acknowledging it exists without fighting it, you remove its power. You just say, okay, there's that worry about tomorrow's meeting. You observe it floating by rather than getting into a boxing ring with it.
Okay, so you're just sort of waving at the night watchman from a distance instead of joining him on his patrol.
I love that. Yes, exactly.
So what happens after we note the thought?
Then we use grounding techniques to shift the brain's processing power. The source specifically highlights the 5-4-3-2-1 sensory method.
I hear about grounding all the time, but I feel like the actual mechanics of it usually get glossed over. How does counting things actually stop a panic spiral?
It is entirely about cognitive bandwidth. The brain only has so much processing power at any given time. When you are in a what-if spiral, all your resources are being hogged by the limbic system, which processes emotion and fear.
So it's basically overloading the system.
Right. And the 5-4-3-2-1 method forces you to systematically engage your sensory cortex instead. You name 5 things you can see, 4 you can physically feel, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste.
So by forcing your brain to process, like the texture of your blanket or the hum of the air conditioner, you're stealing the processing power away from the anxiety?
Precisely. You literally starve the anxiety spiral of the neurological resources it needs to keep running.
Okay, so once we've distracted the watchman's eyes and ears, what do we do about all the leftover physical tension? Because, my mind might be distracted, but my shoulders are still up by my ears.
Well, that leads perfectly to the third strategy. Progressive muscle relaxation. This relies on the physiological feedback loop between your body and your brain.
How does that loop work?
You systemically tense and then deeply release each muscle group, starting from your toes and working all the way up to your forehead. If your muscles are clenched, your brain receives a signal that you are bracing for impact, so it keeps the stress response active.
Oh, wow. So if I physically let go...
When you deliberately force the muscles to release, you send a physical, all-clear signal back up to the brain.
Okay, these first 3 make complete intuitive sense, but I have to say, the 4th strategy in the clinical guide threw me a bit. It says, To cool the body slightly.
Right. Cooling down.
Wait, hold on. Cooling the body, usually when we want to sleep, the instinct is to bundle up. I mean, we want the heavy duvet, we want to be a cozy burrito. Why on earth are we cooling down when we are stressed?
It raises a really important point about human biology. We definitely associate heavy blankets with comfort, but physiologically, when your nervous system is in a state of high anxiety, your core temperature actually rises.
Really, I never realized that.
Yes. You might not even notice it, but your body is running hot, literally preparing your muscles for a fight or flight action.
Wow, so the night watchman has broken a sweat.
He really has.
Yeah.
And this is where the mechanism gets really interesting. Cooling the body specifically drops cortisol levels.
Wait, just temperature alone changes the hormone?
Yes. Cortisol is your primary long-term stress hormone. By lowering your body temperature, like kicking off a blanket, turning down the thermostat, or even putting a cool washcloth on the back of your neck, you are directly manipulating your endocrine system. You're using temperature to physically force your stress hormones to drop.
That is wild. You're speaking the nervous system's physical language when it refuses to listen to logic. That is so much more effective than just lying there hoping to feel calm.
It is highly effective. And the final fifth strategy is for when the thoughts are just, too loud to ignore. Journal for 5 minutes to externalize thoughts.
But wait, doesn't writing it down just make me focus on the anxiety more? I feel like I'd just be creating a permanent record of my panic.
That's a common fear, but it's actually about a psychological phenomenon known as cognitive offloading. When thoughts are bouncing around in your head, the brain feels the need to keep repeating them so you don't forget them. That is the rumination loop.
Because it thinks it's vital survival info.
Exactly. But by externalizing the thoughts onto paper, you signal to your brain that the information is safely stored. You are essentially handing the night watchman a logbook. Once he writes down the incident report, he finally feels comfortable clocking out.
That is brilliant. Okay, so note the thought. Use the 5-4-3-2-1 sensory method to shift cognitive bandwidth, systematically release muscle tension, drop your body temperature to lower cortisol, and externalize the loops in a journal.
Those are the 5.
Those are incredibly practical tools. But I think there is a reality we have to address here. Sometimes, no matter how much you cool your room or tense your muscles, the anxiety just wins.
Yes. And that is the crucial pivot in this source material. Coping strategies are wonderful for managing occasional situational stress. But we have to draw the line between, say, a tough week at work and a clinical issue that requires more than just a cool washcloth.
Which brings us right back to that guessing game we talked about at the very beginning. That awful feeling of lying in the dark, wondering, is this normal or is this too much?
Yeah.
How do we actually know when we've crossed that line?
The clinical threshold outlined by CHC is actually incredibly clear, and it gives us a hard metric. If you are experiencing nighttime anxiety more than 3 nights a week for more than a month, it is time to formally screen for an anxiety disorder.
3 nights a week for more than a month. I mean, that takes the emotional guesswork out of it entirely.
It really does. And if someone is hitting that threshold, the source provides the exact same tool that licensed therapists use to evaluate it, the G87 screening.
Let's focus on the G87 for a second, because the way CHC presents this is really a game changer. G87 stands for Generalized Anxiety Disorder 7-Item Scale. But it's not just some BuzzFeed internet quiz. It is a clinically validated tool.
Very much so.
And listeners can go to cheaththerapy.com, a mental health test, right now and take it. It's completely free. It takes exactly 2 minutes. It is totally private, and it requires no email address to start.
The accessibility is the whole point there.
Yeah.
It moves a person from a state of passive, subjective suffering to a state of active, objective understanding.
The psychological relief of that just cannot be overstated. I mean, imagine you're lying in bed feeling like you are losing your mind. The power of shifting from emotional guessing to objective data is massive.
It gives you a footing.
Yeah. You don't have to lie there agonizing anymore. You take the 2 minutes and you get a real baseline. But, okay, knowing is only half the battle. Let's say a listener takes the G87, gets their results, and realizes that the screening indicates a strong need for professional help. What does the actual path to remission look like?
Well, the clinical text outlines coping and healing counseling as the primary resource here, and their entire model is built around removing the traditional barriers to mental health care. First and foremost, CHC is a 100% telehealth, IPA-compliant practice serving all 159 counties in the state of Georgia.
I have to say, the friction of actually getting to a therapist usually stops people before they even start,
Oh, absolutely.
especially when you are already exhausted from a lack of sleep. The idea of getting in your car, sitting in rush hour traffic, finding parking, and then sitting in some sterile waiting room, it's just completely overwhelming. The fact that this is 100% telehealth removes that specific, exhausting barrier.
It allows you to access specialized care from the exact environment where you need it most, your own home. They have a diverse, culturally competent team of over 15 licensed therapists, which includes clinical social workers, professional counselors, and marriage and family therapists.
That's a really well-rounded team.
It is. They offer individual, couples, family, and team therapy, covering clinical specialties like anxiety, stress, depression, trauma and PTSD, grief, and relationship issues.
Let's talk about the logistics of that care, though, because beyond the physical commute, the biggest barriers are always scheduling and cost. I mean, finances shouldn't be the thing keeping you awake at night when you are literally trying to get help for the things keeping you awake at night.
No, they shouldn't. And the source addresses those financial realities directly. They've structured it to be highly accessible. For one, they offer evening appointments so you don't have to disrupt your workday.
That's huge.
And they accept most major commercial insurances, Aetna, Cigna, BCBS, UHC, and Humana, with copays ranging from just $0 to $40 a session. And for Medicaid patients, the copay is literally $0.
Wow. To be able to get specialized licensed care for potentially $0 out of pocket, that completely changes the landscape for someone who feels trapped by their mental health.
It makes it an actual option rather than a luxury.
Exactly. But what does the therapy actually do? The guide mentions evidence-based treatments like CBT and ACT. How do those therapies actually stop the 2.0 AM panic?
This is where we get into the mechanics of rewiring the brain. CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, targets those rumination and what-if loops we discussed earlier. It teaches you how to identify cognitive distortions.
What does that mean in practice?
You learn to recognize that your 2.0 AM thoughts are actually liars. CBT helps you systematically dismantle the false threats your brain is constantly presenting.
So it's about changing the narrative. What about ACT then?
ACT stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. It operates a little differently. Instead of trying to eliminate the anxious thoughts entirely, ACT builds psychological flexibility. It teaches you how to accept the presence of the night watchman without letting him dictate your behavior.
So you stop fighting him.
Right. You learn to unhook your physical reaction from the emotional thought, which breaks the cycle of secondary anxiety.
And the data on these therapies is what really caught my eye in the clinical guide. Because, when you are trapped in a panic at 2 a.m., it feels permanent. It feels like, well, this is just who I am now. But the numbers tell a very different story.
The numbers are deeply, deeply encouraging. Clinical trials show that evidence-based treatments for anxiety like CBT and ACT have remission rates of 50 to 70%.
That bears repeating, 50 to 70%.
Yes. More than half of the individuals who engage in these structured therapies achieve full clinical remission. They don't just learn to cope. They fundamentally alter how their nervous system responds to stress through neuroplasticity.
They physically change their brains.
Exactly. The neural pathways that used to default to panic are overwritten with pathways that default to regulation. They literally get their nights back.
It drives home the absolute most important point of this entire deep dive. You do not have to just live with this. You don't have to accept that your nights belong to a misfiring nervous system. Nighttime anxiety is a highly treatable condition.
The framework is there. The tools are there. It just requires taking that initial step to measure what is actually happening.
Knowing your baseline is everything. I want to remind everyone listening right now, you do not have to keep guessing in the dark. If you are lying awake more than 3 nights a week for more than a month, please go get objective data. Go take that 2-minute free screening at chieftherapy.com mental health tests.
And for listeners in Georgia who are ready to just bypass the guessing and talk directly to a licensed professional, the contact details and the source material are very straightforward.
Let me make sure everyone has those. You can call CHC directly at 404-832-0102. Again, that is 404-832-0102. You can explore their team and services online at chieftherapy.com, or you can email them at support@chieftherapy.com. With their 100% telehealth model, evening hours, and incredible insurance accessibility, help is truly just a screen away.
As we wrap up this analysis, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, especially if you find yourself awake staring at the ceiling later tonight.
All right, let's hear it.
Well, We spent a lot of time today talking about the biology of the overvigilant nervous system. And because nighttime anxiety is essentially a misfiring survival mechanism,
Mm.
your body desperately trying to protect you from perceived danger. What if we completely changed how we frame it?
I'm intrigued. Frame it how?
What if, instead of viewing your racing thoughts as a broken, defective part of your brain that you have to somehow conquer or go to war with, you simply recognize them as an overzealous bodyguard, a bodyguard that genuinely means well, that is working incredibly hard to keep you safe, but just needs your gentle, conscious permission to finally clock out for the night?